if you're a druid and you want to deal damage in your cat form and do all this crazy stuff, there's a random item in a level 30 dungeon that you have to use if you want to be competitive in your damage dealing, and you have to farm it every time because it only has 3 charges on it. So you have to keep going back to this dungeon called Nomergon to get this stupid item to use it to be a relevant damage dealer. There's just all these weird combos.
You have never confused me, yet turned me on in one sentence. World of Warcraft has been the definitive MMORPG since its launch in 2004. Throughout the years, the game has evolved and changed through many expansions, and sometimes not always for the best. In recent years, dedicated fans have demanded the original version of World of Warcraft be re-released to once again experience the game in its original state. Many fans' demands were answered with the release of World of Warcraft Classic in August 2019. We reminisce about our experiences with WoW during its early days, during its launch, during its good and bad times. We're going to talk about that nostalgia factor that World of Warcraft bring us right now on another exciting episode of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode available each and every Sunday with yours truly, Juan Velas from Puerto Rico. Joining me, I have two people that definitely know way more about World of Warcraft than I do, starting with from Boston, Massachusetts, Mr. Ryan McNulty. Now, Ryan, in your case, when did you first hear about the World of Warcraft?
I first heard about WoW through friends in high school, which is when, I was in high school at the time of it releasing, and I had heard about it for, a couple of years before I really got involved with it. One of my friends basically kept telling me, oh, you gotta play, and I was reluctant for a long time, just mainly due to my computer not being the best, but eventually I did cave.
And we have from London, Ontario, Keith Poshik. Same thing, man. The game came out in 2004, but when did you first experience it?
I'm trying to pinpoint exactly. I know the patch that I started playing in. It was the pre-release to Naxxramas, because I have vivid memories of the Nax event that when I was leveling up my first character. But WoW was a weird one for me, because I was one of those people that was like, MMORPGs, those are stupid. Who needs an atlas to buy a game? And then a friend of mine got me into it. Now I live in a constant state of being a recovering WoW addict. And this is going to be a really hard episode for me, because I live in a constant state of wanting to go back, but I just can't let myself.
It's a scary thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can actually pinpoint to when I first started playing, because believe it or not, the South Park episode, even though most things would tell you people wouldn't want to play after seeing that episode.
I imagine a lot of people have that story, though.
Yeah, but yeah, I started around October of 2006, I want to say, when the South Park episode aired. I think the next day I went out and bought the game, so yeah, there you go.
According to Wowpedia, I would have started around June of 2006.
Wow. So the craziest thing is that I actually played the game when it first came out. I didn't know what it was, but I went to a store and they gave me the trial discs, the infamous trial discs that you could get somewhere. And I just popped it in, and I remember walking around farms, and I didn't know what an MMORPG was. I had played Silk Road, I think it was.
Yeah, I think we all played that.
Silk Road.
Yeah. So I played those, but never did I get into a game where it's like, this is your life. You can easily choose to stop playing every other video game out there and only play this. And I think that as time went on, MMORPGs evolved so much. I mentioned at the opening that people eventually started clamoring for the original one, but I think you have to ask yourself what happened. Not just in the sake of World of Warcraft, that back then you would get into trams. You would actually have to wait to get in queues to be able to get into dungeons. But with the evolution of smartphones, devices, I think people wanted things now. People didn't want to wait, right? And then maybe eventually, and I will have to get your guys' feedback about that, it went into a thing where it was so routinary, it was so about, well, you got to keep leveling up, that the adventure element that I first fell in love with when it comes to WoW sort of fell off. What about you guys when it comes to that?
I mean, WoW, when we played it, yeah, exactly, and there's a reason, WoW Classic has now been released, and there was a huge demand for people to go back and experience it. And it's very fitting for this podcast because it's really the experiment in nostalgia. Is it nostalgia, or is there something to this game? And WoW is just a very interesting video game experiment in the way that it's a game that started in 2004, has never stopped, and has evolved with the times. So now, we see what current World of Warcraft is in the expansion Battle for Azeroth versus what it originally was, and they're almost two different games. And WoW, the classic WoW, was really about it's about the journey, not the destination. Things were difficult, so you wanted to group up with people, and there wasn't instantaneous rewards. You had to really work to get things. So everything you got felt very rewarding because you had to work so hard to get it. And that might have turned some people away, but for the people that enjoyed that type of play style, it was very immersive, very engrossing. And obviously, as the gaming market evolved, World of Warcraft, to stay relevant, evolved with it. And eventually, I think a lot of people think it lost its way at some point.
Yeah, I think it's less about that it lost the sense of exploration and more that people matured as they played more World of Warcraft. Because you're only going to get that experience once of walking into a giant capital city for the first time. And then by the 10th time you're there, you're like, okay, I need to get to the blacksmith, get to do what I need to do, then go quest. And I'm one of those people where WoW became a chore for me at one point where it's like, okay, I started a new character. How fast can I get them to max level? And it was more about going through this process that I've created and getting things done as efficiently as possible. Even though that exploration is there, and every time that there's a new expansion pack, I do think that feeling comes back for a bit because there's tons of things going around like, oh, look at how beautiful this space is. But it just, as you put more time into it, the excitement of it becomes less and less and less because you just want to get to that next thing. You want to hit your next goal.
I guess it's kind of like what Ryan mentioned, where you have Guild Wars, but then you eventually had Guild Wars 2. You talk about Call of Duty, it feels like for years people have been saying they should change from a sequel model to a subscription model. But here's World of Warcraft. It's still technically the same game. Sure, you got to buy a lot of expansions, but you can theoretically still pop in your original disc, and in some way, you're going to get a video game, even if it's limited. But what happens when the people that, maybe like us, we were around 14 years old when we first got the game, you get older, you get a job, you have responsibility. So maybe those 8 hours that you had during the summertime where you could dedicate an entire time to just explore, maybe make a new character. If you didn't like that, you could start over. What happens when you have a job and now you're like, no, I hope to level up 10 times in this session. But I feel like they were so forced to do that. I'll never forget it. By the point that I want to talk about now, Keith was super hooked still into WoW, and you were always trying to persuade me to get back into it. And you tried to explain everything. Like there was a hub world. You started explaining some Pokemon elements and some rates that would go up. And I just, like, the first thing I asked you is, what game is this? Because it looked like World of Warcraft, but everything that you were presenting to me was just like so convoluted, so complicated, and you loved it because I could feel your enthusiasm.
I loved it so much, but that's one of the beautiful things about WoW and the time period that Juan is talking about. It's really split into two parts, but the time that I was really, really big into WoW was during the Wrath of the Lich King era, where I would be on my server. I got to the point where I was like a top heroic raiding guild in the top 10 kills. Still proud of that to this day. But anyway, it's such a different game than what you described at the beginning of this episode as this big world that's fun to explore. Once you get to that end game, this whole thing opens up of, okay, now it's less about exploring and seeing the world for what it is and trying to work through these mechanics instead, where it's basically like getting together with 10, 25, 40 other people, 100 in some instances, and doing a dance and everybody knowing exactly where to be and exactly what their spot is and just coordinating together. And the experience when you start WoW to there is like, that's kind of that evolutionary path that I was talking about earlier. And that took a lot of my life. And there was a point where I had a job, I would go to work my 8 hours, come home, play WoW till 2 a.m, go to sleep, go to work, play WoW till 2 a.m, and did that for 7 days a week back in the raiding days.
That sounds like Ryan now.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, yeah, the era Keith is talking about basically is kind of the end of the golden age for World of Warcraft. There was definitely a turning point from the Cataclysm expansion onward where things kind of moved in a different direction. And funny enough, that's kind of when I started to get more hardcore, at least for a time, because as much as I am nostalgic about vanilla WoW back in its heyday, I never even made it to 60. In the Burning Crusade era, I got to like 61, never made it to 70. So the first time I actually got max level was Cataclysm, because I stepped away during Wrath of the Lich King, came back for Cataclysm, and the conveniences that they had added, I really appreciated at the time. But as those conveniences started to evolve, the most important part of an MMO, the community, started to fall apart. And even though I was kind of having my best times in WoW during Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, an expansion a lot of people don't like, but I think there's some good aspects too. Things like the group finder, right? So in the original WoW, you had a group of 5 people to do a dungeon, and yeah, it was annoying that you go into a major city and you have to spam need a tank, and all that.
LFG, but, 1 tank, dead mines.
So yes, that is annoying, but the server you were on was, it was a community of people, and it's not like today where there's cross server and you don't, you meet somebody, you never see them again. You would get to know these people, you might group up with them more than once, and then you would have to physically go to where the dungeon is. So you would kind of have to traverse through some guys that were outside the dungeon. You had to fight through there just to get in, and then you battle this dungeon. So like from a perspective of just being immersed in the world, I really appreciated that. Eventually, they did a thing called the Group Finder, where you sit, you just pop the little button, and it says, you can still play the rest of the game, and it just says, oh, in 20 minutes, you'll be in a dungeon, and then the little thing pops up. It's like, oh, you're ready, and then all of a sudden, you're just instantly warped to a dungeon with 4 people. 4 strangers, you have no idea who they are. Everyone does the dungeon. Nobody says a word to each other. As soon as it's over, everybody leaves, and you're done. Yeah, you never see him again. Never hear from him. As convenient as that is, eventually pieces of the game start to feel missing, and it starts to feel more empty. And it feels like, am I even playing an MMO? Obviously, when you get to end game raiding, there's still a lot of coordination that needs to go there, But even then, in Pandaria, they released the Raid Finder, where it took that concept of raiding and where you needed to do these elaborate dances, and then here's 25 or 24 other people that we're throwing you in with. We made it we simplified it so dummies can pull it off, and here you go, have fun, see the content. It's always been a problem of immersion versus convenience in WoW, and I think that's been the biggest struggling point as they've gone on throughout the years.
And I think that happens with almost any video game that doesn't really die, especially what happens when you don't want to penalize the people that are not playing every day. So you catch those people up, but then you're sort of penalizing the ones that do play every day because they're working hard for that loot. But then the other person, hey, you get an instant boost. Your character's maxed out. You get at least one person. So it's hard to incentivize one part without kind of pissing the other one off, which I guess is around the time when you started having a lot of custom servers. For those that don't know, there's the official servers for which you pay a subscription for, but there have always been these offline servers. Private servers, and there people started doing some stuff like going back to the vanilla days. And Blizzard said, hey, guess what? No, because it's my video game, And then people started getting the rumblings, and obviously this happened throughout the span of multiple years, but
What was
they
the name
started
of that
saying,
super popular one? Because there
It
was
was
one.
Nostalrius.
Nostalrius.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Nostalrius. So there have been private servers for years. I think
Yeah.
even like once Burning Crusade came out, people
Mm-hmm.
were already trying to replicate vanilla servers on, private servers, whatever. But eventually, I think around 2016, I want to say, Nostalrius really blew up and became this big server where people, who had been playing WoW throughout the years, just wanted to go back and experience the original WoW. I think it was during the expansion in Warlords of Draenor, I'm pretty sure, which was one of the most unpopular expansions that WoW ever released and regarded as one of the worst. And I think that probably had a big play in a lot of people joining that server. And eventually it became just massively popular to the point that Blizzard had to step in and shut it down to protect their intellectual property. But for years at BlizzCon, people had always asked, hey, would there be any interest in bringing in classic servers? And they would always shut it down. And J. Allen Brack, who I now believe is the president of Blizzard, he had the famous quote of "You think you do, but you don't," telling them, you're nostalgic for it, but do you want to spam for a group in trade chat in a city all day? Do you want to have to upgrade your do you want to have to like level up your weapon skill when you change from a
Do you
axe
want
to
to
a
use
sword?
rank 3 smite or rank 4 smite?
Yeah, all these things that are a little clunky about classic WoW. But eventually, I mean, Blizzard saw that there was serious demand for these servers. So a couple years ago at BlizzCon, they announced World of Warcraft Classic, and now it just came out.
yeah, and for that, it is fascinating, especially we have a podcast dedicated to pretty much nostalgia. On one side, you have a lot of games with HD collections, or you have things like the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. I just recently played the Medieval demo on the PS4, which is a remake of a PS1 game. So there's that part, right? Where it's like take the base mechanics, but give it a completely different fresh coat of paint. World of Warcraft, a classic, which you will be talking about very soon, Mr. McNulty. Obviously, there are some quality of life improvements, technically speaking, things to make things perform better. But a lot of people just said, give us the base one. And I remember even people were saying like, but when you say base, do you mean like 1.0? Do you mean like this patch? Well, but is it pre-Burning Crusade? It's difficult, right? Because not everybody jumped into the game at a specific point. So when you guys found out, because obviously you played way more WoW than I have, and you heard WoW Classic, what did you want that classic experience to actually be?
For me, I would say as long as I could do the content and, you had the 60 level cap, I wasn't as concerned with, is it patch 1.10 or patch 1.12, any of that stuff. That did not matter to me. They ended up going with some of the things like the talents and all of that. They wanted to put at like a state where things were at 1.12. Basically, the patch before Burning Crusade, they felt was like the most matured, balanced version, even though balance is a funny thing in Classic because things were a little crazy. But so that's what they decided to do. And I was completely fine with that. There was a lot of people that were much more like ticky-tack on certain things. And there was always that big push of hashtag no changes. They didn't want that Blizzard to change anything about Classic, like any quality of life stuff. More so for the fact that they looked at it as like this slippery slope, right? Where, if we take away weapon skill, well then what if we took away this or that? So people were like, let's be safe and just say no changes.
It opens up Pandora's box.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they were pretty faithful to that as best they could, given, the challenge of recreating this in a modern kind of, with their modern systems.
So, Keith, you haven't played it. You and I haven't. Ryan has, correct?
Correct.
WoW Classic. But regardless, what is WoW Classic for you in terms of, like, this is what you want out of that throwback experience?
See, I've kind of always been on the side of J. Allen Brack on this one, where to me, WoW Classic is something that people think that they want, they play it for 20 minutes and they're like, oh, this actually kind of sucks, and then go back to whatever else they were doing. And that's kind of how I feel about WoW Classic. Like, I know there's a ton of people enjoying it, and I'm happy that it's a hit, but it's a matter of, oh, they've done so many things convenience-wise, just as far as like UI, talents, leveling, that isn't such a slog and isn't such a time commitment that I'm hesitant to go back and play through WoW Classic again. And there are people that want that, and I am happy that they are getting that experience, and I hope that they stay true to it. They say that they're going to go through the entire patch schedule, and to me, that's the most important aspect of it, where eventually we're going to get our Blackwing layers and Molten Cores. Well, I guess Molten Core would be already there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
it is.
then you get Zul'Gurub, and then eventually leading up to our...
Yeah, and then AQ and then Nax.
And then AQ and then Nax. And then just the fact that because it's such a legendary thing in the WoW community, that people get to experience the gate opening of Encourage again as this, or not just as this event that people talk about as, oh, back in my day, it was crazy. The entire server worked together
we
to
only
open
got
these gates.
shitty potato quality YouTube videos of that.
Exactly.
Most people did not get to experience
Now they
that.
can, and
So
now
the
they
fact
can.
in an official state that is that's available and that's possible, I think that WoW Classic is awesome for that, and I'm really forward to looking at that from afar, because just the things that I remember about Classic kind of turn me off on it, where like if I wanted to play a rogue, I couldn't raid in Molten Core because the rocks are immune to my Rens, and just those little things. Or I originally started playing as a paladin, I never got to end game with him in WoW Classic, but all paladins were really good for are buff machines, where you're just going through the roster, giving everybody their wisdom, everybody their kings, and then starting back at the top, and then you were kind of side healers. The fact that one of my favorite classes is so shoehorned in that way is kind of discouraging, and that's something that I think they worked on big time in old WoW, or in current WoW, that more appeals to me.
Yeah. Are you familiar? Well, I was going to ask Keith, are you familiar with S-Fand, the classic Ret Paladin?
No.
Oh, he's a big streamer on Twitch for WoW Classic, but he's like known as kind of one of the few Ret Paladins for Classic. But you have to do a bunch of weird things to make Ret Paladin be relevant and work, and even then, there's still not like a top damage dealer.
If they're taking the talents and builds of the pre-BC patch, that's when things were good. And I understand why they did it, but there is also that little bit of appeal of like just go through the balance changes as people experience them.
I think they talked about that, but it was such a huge undertaking. But yeah, that was kind of one of the charms of Classic WoW, was that there wasn't necessarily everything being balanced, right? I'm leveling as a shaman in Classic WoW, and Wind Fury is friggin' broken, and it's amazing, and you have a ton of fun with it. But yeah, there was some really crazy things, but the discovery in WoW Classic is great. And I guarantee you people will still discover weird things that work in Classic, whereas things are so systematic now in current WoW, where it's like, oh, I know if I go to this next dungeon, this piece of gear will be definitely better than my last piece of gear. When, you know, in Classic WoW, it's like, yeah, if you were a shaman and you could do all these cool moves leveling up, well, you might have to be a healer at max level. And if you're a druid and you want to deal damage in your cat form and do all this crazy stuff, there's a random item in a level 30 dungeon that you have to use if you want to be competitive in your damage dealing, and you have to farm it every time because it only has 3 charges on it. So you have to keep going back to this dungeon called Nomergon to get this stupid item to use it to be a relevant damage dealer. There's just all these weird combos.
You have never confused me, yet turned me on. In one sentence. For anybody that's a casual WoW fan or viewer or player like I am, Ryan said many words right now, but just to be clear,
I understood every single one of them.
Yeah,
and I hope
you see, you do that stuff. I'm the balance in this conversation. So for those who don't know, this isn't an expansion that you have to buy. So you subscribe the way you would to World of Warcraft on a basic basis, and then you actually get access to this. So I guarantee you there's a lot of people like myself that are just like, I'll subscribe for a month. I'll subscribe for a month. We're going to be reviewing a game pretty soon. So my goal is as soon as I finish playing that game, I'm just going to subscribe for that month because I don't intend on going back, full blast. But there's something about being able to go back and have that experience that I couldn't go back to. I can still pop in any of my PlayStation 1 games and they run the way they would back then, but you couldn't do that with World of Warcraft, and that's scary, right? In the topic of video game preservation.
That's one of the main things you got to think about with an MMO and why there was so much demand. Because if I play Super Mario 64, as a kid, I can go back and play Super Mario 64. But for everyone that had so much fun during the early days of World of Warcraft, there was no way for them to go back and enjoy that game. So, which is why all those private servers came out. So finally, it had been enough time and enough demand that it did make sense for Blizzard to go and do this. And I've been enjoying the hell out of it. It helps to have somebody you're playing with. So Juan, I strongly advise you got to at least play with one other person.
I'll get my wife, Nicole. We're going to play
an
World of
MMO
Warcraft
is only
Classic.
as good as the people you play it with. And even though there's a lot of inconveniences in Classic WoW, I've spent the last 2 years hyped for this game, and I've been watching all the videos, so I knew exactly what I was in for, and I love it. It's not perfect by any means, but it is a way more immersive experience with a more involved community, and it's just a ton of fun. Plus, I never did that end game content in Classic, and that's another motivation. I'd love to go through all the raids that I never got to experience.
So Ryan, something I wanted to ask you directly, and I know this is difficult to somebody that did play the game when it first came out or around that time, right? It's like in 2019, what is your objectively favorite thing about this? Treating it as a game that's available now. People are going to subscribe now. Maybe they never played it back then, but they always heard about that. What's the thing you're currently enjoying the most with WoW Classic?
I would just say the journey of leveling right now, doing planning things out with I'm leveling with one of my friends. We're just we're back and forth throughout the day, we should do this next, and because leveling's not just this cakewalk that it is currently, or they have the level boost. You gotta sometimes you gotta go to a zone, do some quests.
What zone are you currently in?
Currently I'm between a couple zones of Desolus, Arathi Highlands, Stranglethorn Vale. I'm around level.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm level 38 right now as of this recording, so I'm close to that mount, and I've been saving up to try and have enough gold for that. So that's another thing. There's a lot of, it's not just simply, I go to this zone, do every single quest, and move on. You got to kind of bounce around and plan things out, and your professions you're trying to keep up as well, because they are much more relevant in this game than they are later on. So it's just kind of that journey and planning things out.
Gotta get that Epic Mount quest done, baby.
Yeah, and there's so much to look forward to. It's just been a blast so far.
So Keith, as a closing comment, my friend, based on what you've heard from Mr. McNulty, are you thinking of plunging, of going into it?
I might take the plunge eventually if something happens in current WoW that interests me, because the beautiful thing about this is that it's just added into your WoW subscription, so you have the choice of going new WoW or old WoW. You get both, and if I'm hooked into new WoW, I might as well go check out old WoW. But I'm excited that there's something like this that exists in the Twitch era, as somebody that doesn't know if they have the time commitment, or honestly could let themselves have that time commitment. WoW's a slippery slope for me. I'm like a recovering addict with it. It's a scary thing, but to be able to go watch people go through Nax, eventually go through old Nax, where it was
very
just
little people got to experience that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I think 0.9% of the population back in vanilla actually got to experience Naxxramas, and a lot more eventually got there in Wrath. But for people to get to go do that old WoW, to get to go fight old Kel'Thuzad in his pure form, I love that, and I'm going to really enjoy watching that from a distance. I've watched a couple of people stream raids of Onyxia and have really enjoyed that. So I am really happy it exists. It's just not something that I can take the plunge on, but for the people that do, have all the fun in the world.
Yeah, so everybody,
Of Warcraft.
yes, you have to do that. You have to do that. But please let us know what you think about a World of Warcraft Classic, whether you played it. Like Keith, you could also be watching a stream, and maybe that's your first time experiencing it. Please let us know on social media, A Cast of the Past. We have some lovely people on our Discord, acastofthepast.com/Discord, that are fans of World of Warcraft. And just in case MMORPGs are not your thing, I think we have something pretty special that, Keith, we're going to give Ron the floor, because finally, in the month of October, I know this isn't like a super old podcast, but it feels like at least once every episode this damn game is brought up. Ryan, what are we reviewing during the month of October?
In October, we are finally going to cover the game Silent Hill 2, a series I've brought up many, many times. This is widely regarded as the best one in the series. So I was like, if these guys are going to play any Silent Hill game, it's got to be Silent Hill 2. So we're going to be covering that during the spooky, scary skeleton month of October.
Yeah, we got some cool things lined up there. So if you enjoy the podcast, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and or Facebook. That makes Keith very, very happy. So up until next time, thank you for watching and supporting, and we will be back with another exciting episode of A Cast
to the
Past.
Keith, I want to go to the Arathi Highlands with you.
All right, I'll take you down to Strangerthorn Vale, where the jungle's...
You can take me there all night long, Keith.
The jungle's pretty, and then we'll end the night at Zul'Farrak.
Ooh, I heard there's popcorn.
And a temple.